Hello, today we are going to be looking at artwork that is inspired by Ovid's Metamorphoses. Hi, I am Aidan Boland, and let us begin. So before we start the artwork, let's understand the qualities that Ovid's stories typically possess. Just like his stories, many of his paintings focus on topics considered vulgar, mainly ideas of sexuality and graphic violence, the gods themselves. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at each artwork displayed. We're going to be looking at its creator, the creator's history, and the story relevance, and how these all come together to create a beautiful image. All right. Our first painting is Las Hilarandas, the Spinners. This art piece was created by Diego Velázquez in the year 1657. Diego Velázquez is acknowledged as one of the most famous European painters. He is the most important Spanish painter of the 17th century. He was the court painter of Philip IV of Spain, and this meant that he took in commissions or instructions from royalty, like the king, to create the topics that they desired. His artwork usually focused on large, complicated scenes that fostered both realism and storytelling. His painting of Las Hilarandas is no different, as it depicts the famous scene of Arachne facing off against Minerva, or Athena, in a weaving contest. So let's take a deeper look at it right now. All right. So when we first look at this painting, we see here, this I believe to be Minerva, as she is disguised as an older woman, just like Ovid's telling of the story. And this here is Arachne facing the opposite of her. It looks that they have just finished their tapestries themselves. And what I really like about this painting is the difference or the symmetry between the foreground and the background. So in the background we have the tapestries, and when we see this figure here, well, this looks like to be Minerva or Athena. We see her Corinthian helmet, her arm raised to the right, a classic characteristics of what Athena looks like in both sculptures and paintings. This person here, I believe, is part of the tapestry, and I believe it's supposed to be Arachne herself. They look very similar. They have very similar hairstyles, and I believe that this is supposed to show off a sort of symmetry between the background and the foreground. In the foreground, Minerva is facing the viewer, while Arachne is facing opposite of the viewer. But then in the background, we see a sort of reflection where the disguise that is Athena disappears, and we see her true form facing off against Arachne, who is now facing towards the viewer. So I like it because it kind of shows like a mirror effect of the mirror showing the reality of the situation. The disguise has fallen off, and we see what's really going on in the background. This is a battle between Athena and Arachne in a weaving contest of beautiful tapestries. All right, the next painting that we're going to be looking at is a pretty violent one. It is called The Punishment of the Arrogant Niobe by Diana and Apollo, created in 1772. This art piece was created by Pierre-Charles Jambart, born in 1746 in Paris, France. There's not a lot of information about him regarding his early life or a lot about his career, but it is known that he found success in painting mainly through creation of portraits using a Franc-Garde style of elegance and playfulness that didn't try to be too realistic. But then, after cementing himself as an artist in this background, he established himself as the leader of the neoclassical movement in French art, which saw the emergence of paintings based on classical ideologies and myths. His artwork of Niobe is a critical piece of this movement, as it depicts the story that Ovid tells of Niobe getting her punishment of hubris. As we know from Ovid, Niobe had talked herself as better than even Latona, the mother of Diana and Apollo. And Latona became so outraged by this statement that she ordered her son, Apollo, her daughter Diana, and we see Diana with a sort of crescent moon crown, which is again very common in artwork depicting Diana, and they were told to slaughter basically the 7 sons and 7 daughters of Niobe. The first thing when I saw this painting was the sort of graphic violence that we see from the arrows as we see them shooting their arrows. Where they hit is pretty particular. They hit right at the base of the neck, bullseye, with perfect precision. And this is sort of what you would expect from Apollo and Diana, as they are well known to be very well skilled in the art of archery. And just like Ovid's telling of the story, Niobe is holding on to who is her youngest daughter as she pleads and begs for her last child to be spared from the destruction of her hubris, as she can do nothing but watch as her children are shot down by these two gods. And this whole painting depicts this scene beautifully. All right, the next piece that we're going to be looking at is called Diana and Actaeon, created in 1559. This artwork depicts the famous scene of the hunter Actaeon happening upon Diana and her nymphs bathing. This extravagant piece was created by the master painter Titian, commissioned by King Philip II of Spain. He is considered one of the greatest Italian Renaissance painters of the time. He worked on a plethora of both Christian and classical mythology. His painting Diana and Actaeon is actually a painting of a group, or is a part of a group of paintings that were based on classical mythology, mainly looking at Ovid stories. Many of his works displayed the human form and sort of set the standard for what physical beauty would look like in art at the time. So let's take a closer look at it now. All right, so here's the painting that we are looking at. Here is Actaeon, the hunter. He had just dropped his bow because he is just so surprised at what he sees. We see all the nymphs are surprised. Here is Diana. Again, we see the crescent moon crown that we saw in the last painting, that we know that this is Diana. One of the nymphs is holding onto a cloth, surprised, and trying to help cover Diana. We see some of them washing. When we see in the background the skull of a stag and also one of Actaeon's dogs. This is unlike what we see in Ovid's telling of the story, where the dogs only find Actaeon after he had been transformed into a stag. But I believe Titian put both of these elements here, the dog and the stag skull, as sort of foreshadowing his punishment for what has happened here. We know that he's going to be turned into a stag, and we know that his dogs will come upon him and they will eat him alive. So Titian put those elements in here so to tell the viewer that, well, that's what's going to happen. One of the other things that I first noticed when looking at this painting is the character here. This is a dark-skinned nymph closest to Artemis and seems to be the one doing the most to help Diana cover herself away from Actaeon. This character is not seen in other works of the scene that depicts the meeting between Diana and Actaeon. And I tried delving deeper, and the information I could find is this is probably an Ethiopian handmaiden of Artemis. Titian probably depicted this person as a model from Ethiopia that he found in Italy during his time, and he decided to put them in his painting. And so that is where we get this character that is not seen in other works of this type. And so this is the story of a beautiful story beautiful artwork that depicts the story, the gruesome story of Diana and Actaeon. All right, our next painting is probably the most graphic and violent, and it's called Saturn Devouring His Son, created in 1823 by the famous painter Francisco Goya. This painting is very popular and is very well known. It took Goya 4 years in total to complete this work. Francisco Goya himself was a renowned contemporary painter of the 18th and 19th century in Madrid, Spain, and his work usually focused on issues he faced during that time. As during this time, his country of Spain was ravaged by revolution and the Napoleonic War. During his sort of end of life, there's reasons to why he created were considered black paintings. These are paintings that he painted at his home, or usually murals, that were just sort of private and they were never really meant to be seen by outsiders. They usually depict scenes of intense darkness, violence, dread, and Saturn devouring his son is one of these black paintings. And so let's take a closer look at it. All right, so here is the painting in all its glory. It is a very claustrophobic painting. There is no background. There's just darkness with only two entities, a body without a head and an arm, and Kronos himself, who is depicted as a raving, bearded, large, giant creature. It's very unusual, unlike the story that Ovid depicts, or the image that Ovid depicts as an Ovid story. Kronos sort of just gobbles his children in one gulp. He sort of just takes them whole and stores them in his belly. As we know, he ate 5 of his children: Poseidon, Hestia, Hades, Hera, and Demeter. But in Goya's depiction, he's quite literally eating piece by piece one of his children. Now, when I first looked at this painting, I was wondering who he was eating. I believe this to be more of a male figure, but though it's hard to tell with most of its limbs cut off. But I believe this could be sort of one of his sons that he ate. So this could be either Hades or Poseidon. And it's just overall a very gruesome and very violent painting that is very different from what maybe Ovid was trying to show. But it makes sense that as Goya was facing his later years of life of traumatic war violence during his time and illness, that he might want to have painted something a bit more violent, disturbing, to reflect his own mental state or pain that he felt during his time. So this overall is a very famous and very graphic painting by Francisco Goya. All right, the last painting that we're going to be looking at here is Cadmus and Harmonia. It was created in 1877. This piece was created by the artist Evelyn de Morgan. Evelyn de Morgan was an oil painter born in 1855. She is known as one of the most successful female painters of the time. It was very unusual because de Morgan was one of the very few successful female painters who were financially stable. During the time, it was not expected for women to be, well, successful in this sort of art or to receive financial compensation for it. But despite this, Evelyn de Morgan defied gender roles, and just like many of her paintings, she placed female heroes front and center and highlighted the many social and political issues facing women in England at the time. She wasn't afraid to depict nudity or the female form, and this painting itself is a classic painting by Evelyn de Morgan, as it depicts the scene where Cadmus, as we know, was the brother of Europa, trying to find her until he later founds the city of Thebes and later slays a serpent who is sacred to Mars, only to then be transformed into a snake for his deeds. And so let's look at the painting now. All right, so here's the painting in its full glory. A text of Ovid was actually inscribed when it was first exhibited. With lambent tongue he kissed her patient face, crept in her bosom as his dwelling lace, entwined her neck and shared the loved embrace. And this is exactly what we see when Evelyn de Morgan painted it. This is very characteristic of her paintings. Many of her paintings had a female character, either nude or clothed, front and center. And where we see here is Cadmus and Harmonia before she herself was turned into a snake. Her face is distraught as her husband had just been turned into an animal, and we see him sort of lovingly entwine himself with her naked form, laying his head upon her chest, just like what Ovid tells us. And it creates a sort of very nice romantic depiction of both Cadmus and Harmonia before Harmonia herself is then turned into a snake, and both of them live their lives as serpents still in love. So this painting creates a sort of beautiful, romantic, yet tragic scene of the story that Ovid tells. And here is our works cited page. So, all right.